good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It's really a great honor and a huge pleasure to open this online dialogue to present our new 2020 Child Online Protection Guidelines that were launched yesterday via a global virtual press conference. I would like to begin by extending a very special welcome to our honored guest speaker, Her Majesty Queen Sylvia of Sweden, and really to commend her for her tireless efforts to protect children and defend their rights both online and offline. The ITU recognizes Sweden's strong and sustained leadership in this field, and particularly Her Majesty's own position as a real role model and an inspiration for the work of so many agencies and NGOs around the world. And I would therefore like to invite her to share her views and set the scene for this important discussion. Your Majesty, I hand the floor to you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary General, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, children who have suffered abuse, who were robbed of their childhood and instead carry guilt and shame, children who are at risk of future atrocities. It is for all these children that we are here today. Nelson Mandela said, "History will judge us by the difference we make in the everyday lives of children." Today's launch of ITU's new guidelines for child online protection marks an important milestone in our international efforts to end violence against children. I'm happy to see how several UN agencies and many global NGOs, including my foundation Childhood, came together to develop these important new resources that will help to drive action for safeguarding children online. Ladies and gentlemen, it is well over 20 years since I first decided to use my voice and position to break the silence and speak about the unspeakable. The global pandemic of child sexual abuse and exploitation is a topic that I have felt strongly about ever since the first big case in Sweden in 1992. As you can understand, it wasn't easy as a queen to speak about sexually abused children. Whenever I spoke, I saw people looking down or turning their heads. But I persisted, hoping I could make a difference. Nothing, however, could prepare me for the tsunami of child sexual abuse material that we see today, 21 years later, that is flooding the internet. Police say the children are becoming younger, the abuse more severe. Ladies and gentlemen, these children are not just statistics, not just images being passed around. These are real children being abused by real adults, not in a virtual, but in a real world. Today, all of us are benefiting from the wonders of technology. For me, nothing is more gratifying than FaceTiming with my grandchildren. But while I enjoy this privilege, hundreds of millions of children are being placed at risk of violence and harm online. Early on, I learned that if there is a way to use technology for criminal or immoral purposes, there is also a way to use technology to protect our children. One such tool was the NetClean solution, developed with the support of the World Childhood Foundation in 2003. It helps to detect child abuse material on computers and now also on phones. But at the end of the day, technology alone cannot win this war. All stakeholders, policymakers, companies, and civil society must come together. The companies that provide online platforms need to prioritize child online safety. And children need to know that we will protect them and not their abusers. Every minute we wait, thousands of children will suffer. Remember what Nelson Mandela said. History will judge us by the difference we make in everyday lives of children. We can no longer tolerate the scale of online child abuse and exploitation. We must make it our global priority, and we must act now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Majesty, for that powerful message and for your leadership, your dedication, and for the support of the work of the global community on child online protection. And indeed, we must act now. This is, as you have noted, a historic moment, not only for the Child Online Protection Initiative, which was launched almost 10 years ago, but also for the international community as a whole. The revision of these guidelines has been a year-long undertaking. It's involved experts from all over the world. And I want to take a moment to thank our great partners and our contributors for their skills, for their dedication in rethinking, revising, and redesigning the overall set of child online protection guidelines to help us respond to the new needs and the challenges of today's young generation. Last year, the world celebrated the 30th anniversary of two major milestones, one in technology with the invention of the World Wide Web, its anniversary, and one in human rights with the adoption of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. 30 years on, we have an estimated 4.1 billion people online, and 1 in 3 is a child. And as more and more children around the world gain access to the online world through their smartphones, through their tablets, through their computers, it's clear that our collective efforts to protect them will increasingly need to focus on the virtual realm as well as the physical one. We know the risks all too well, and research that was released late last year by the Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development's Working Group on Child Online Safety, and we will hear in a moment from the co-chair of that group. The research indicates that 17% of children online are already exposed to cyberbullying or child sexual abuse material. And the tragedy of child online abuse is documented with increasing frequency in the media, as Her Majesty has just outlined for us. Violent content, online harassment, trolling. Today's social channels and file sharing sites are struggling to deal with these afflictions. And perpetrators are also profiting from the often uncoordinated and hesitant action on the part of the tech sector to effectively combat the problem. One thing is obvious. The current approaches are not working, and we urgently need to find a balance between the legitimate exercise of freedom of expression and the broader interests of society, and particularly of its most vulnerable citizens. Emerging technologies can certainly be part of the solution, but technology alone will not solve the problem. International cooperation will be critical. This urgent global challenge requires a global approach, intergovernmental collaboration, and strong multi-stakeholder cooperation. At the ITU, when we launched our Child Online Protection Initiative back in 2018, it was part of a multi-stakeholder effort within our global cybersecurity agenda. And since then, we've been working to build an international collaborative network, bringing together partners from all sectors of the global community that were committed to creating a safe and empowering online experience for children. A whole spectrum of organizations, from governments to private sector companies, civil society, child welfare institutions, international organizations, they've joined us on this 10-year journey. And I do hope that many more partners will join us in the future, because strong and resilient partnerships are going to be key to the success of this initiative. Our aim has been to make this 2020 version of our Child Online Protection Guidelines a baseline blueprint, basically, something that can be adapted and used in ways that are consistent with national or local customs and laws. And these new guidelines include references to the special situation of children with disabilities when it comes to online risks and harms. And it also picks up on new technological developments such as the Internet of Things, connected toys, online gaming, robotics, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. And you're going to hear more in a few moments from our experts that were leading in the preparation of the guidelines. And as we look forward, we will be implementing these revised guidelines, both at the national and regional level. And we look forward to the support of our partners, to governments, to industry associations, and of course, to civil society. Ladies and gentlemen, when I took office at the start of last year as Director of Telecommunications Development, one of my first actions was to ask my team to begin working on a new youth strategy as part of our Bureau's regular ongoing work program. I believe that we need to engage much more proactively with young people. We need to hear their concerns. We need to understand the ways in which they're vulnerable. Children and youth need and deserve to be heard. We know that young people don't interact with technology the same way that my generation does. So if our policies are going to be effective and targeted in the right places, the guidance and advice of youth will be indispensable. And in the second part of today's discussion, you're going to be hearing more about our plans for implementation. And I do hope that we can count on your support to make our vision of a safe and engaging online environment really a true reality for all. And for us at the ITU, our measure of success is going to be seeing these guidelines properly implemented and positively impacting all areas of society. While I've just spent the past few minutes stressing the risks for children, it might seem a little odd for me to close by also making the case for strengthening global efforts to get more children online. Let us never forget that the internet is the most powerful tool ever invented for extending the reach of healthcare, education, and information exchange. And the COVID crisis has reinforced just how important connectivity is to our children's education. And that's why ITU and UNICEF have been accelerating our efforts around our new GIGA partnership to connect every school in the world and bring to every child information, opportunity, and choice. And in rolling out this GIGA project, we will of course make sure that child online safety is basically at the top of the agenda in this endeavor. So let us not allow the potential risks of online participation dissuade us from our continued efforts to help millions of unconnected children get online safely, so that they can have the chance to take the full advantage of the many benefits that the internet has to offer. Let us instead make our voices heard much more loudly to government and to industry in demanding more responsive and more effective actions to keep our children safe online. We all know that a lot more can be done, and I'm sure you all agree with me that whatever can be done must be done, and it's time for action now. It is now my pleasure and honor to ask my friend and colleague, Dr. Joanna Rubinstein, who leads the Childhood Foundation USA, and she's also the co-chair of the Broadband Commission Working Group that I just referred to give us her special remarks. Joanna, over to you.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. Thank you so much, Your Majesty, for your wise words, as always. Your Royal Highness Queen Sylvia of Sweden, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as Queen Sylvia has so eloquently stated, the abuse and exploitation of children online is not a new phenomenon. In 1998, there were 3,000 reports of child sexual abuse material online. 10 years later, 2008, 100,000. 2018, 45 million of pictures and videos, and in 2019, 70 million. It doesn't take a crystal ball to foresee the future. As hundreds of millions of children gain access to the internet through devices with cameras, unless we find ways to stop the perpetrators, there will be a horrific escalation of violence against children online. We know that adversity in childhood, especially abuse, exploitation, and neglect, often leads to learning disabilities and lifelong mental health problems. These are not only things that ruin children's lives and people's lives, they also create an enormous economic burden on our nations. In 2018, as Doreen Bogdan already said, ITU UNESCO Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development, the only truly multi-stakeholder platform, established a working group on child online safety in anticipation of the broadband expansion in developing countries, where children often represent half of the population. In 2019, a working group report with actionable recommendations was launched at the United Nations by Her Majesty Queen Sylvia. One important recommendation was that by 2021, all nations should implement child safety strategies in the national digital plans. Another recommendation called for the development of technology-driven solutions for child online safety. The report includes data from the Economist Intelligence Unit Index on 60 countries' response to child sexual abuse. The index confirmed that the responses, neither by the governments or by the private sector, were commensurate with the scale of the problem. Then came the COVID-19 pandemic and heightened the risk of child abuse offline and online, especially online by driving children online because the schools were closed. So suddenly we have many more children, younger, spending much greater amount of time online. Dear friends, I want to be absolutely clear that technology isn't evil. Instead, connectivity is a hero of the COVID pandemic. It helps to save lives, provide access to health, information, education, entertainment, markets. However, without the necessary precautions, it also puts hundreds of millions of children at risk. Yes, according to the new reports from Europol, FBI, Internet Watch Foundation, and others, there has been a significant increase in child abuse online during COVID. In April alone, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received over 4 million reports of pictures and videos from tech companies, compared to 1.2 million in April of last year. In UK, 9 million attempts to access child sexual abuse material were blocked in April alone. Quo vadis? In Latin, where are we headed? Definitely not in the right direction. We cannot continue to tolerate crimes against children online. There can be no excuses or justifications. With the new ITU Child Online Protection Guidelines and all the great resources launched yesterday, we have enough reports, recommendations, toolboxes, and technology to prevent and stop this crime. What we need to do is to use them. Or are we lacking political will? Are we lacking awareness? Ladies and gentlemen, I beg you to use your position, your mandate, your communication channels, and all the resources available to you to act now. We can only have a sustainable business model for connectivity when children are safe online. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanna, for those very powerful words indeed. And we hear your plea. We have the tools. We need to act now and use them. Thank you for that. Your advocacy and your engagement has really been crucial over the last months. And we do look forward to working with you, with Childhood, and with others in the Broadband Commission group to advance child online safety. Thank you so much for that. So ladies and gentlemen, while I will be your co-moderator for this afternoon, I will also be joined by a great and inspiring young representative, Aditya, to run the panel. And I would like to invite my co-moderator to jump in and just say a few words. Adi, the floor is yours.
Good day to everyone present. It's a real pleasure and honor being here today. My name is Aditya Sharma, and I'm a 15-year-old joining this call from Bangkok. Now, many of you are persons of high position with extensive experience in this field, and you would be rightfully wondering about my presence and my role here. Please allow me to explain. My first formal interaction with the ITU on child online protection dates back to a few months back, when I had the opportunity to contribute to the consultation process on the new COP guidelines that are being released today. The best part about the new guidelines is the fact that children were consulted and their opinions and suggestions have been incorporated, which indicates a more inclusive and necessary approach by involving children in the guidelines designed to protect them. To me, as a young person, I believe that protecting children on the internet should be one of the most important priorities for ITU. It is critical to prepare the youth, our future, for the internet, which at this point we already know will comprise a big part of the economy that my age group will grow up in. Already today, we are seeing the revolutionary impacts of the internet. The very fact that we're hosting this call right now should be proof enough of that. And this impact will only grow over time. And that brings me to COVID-19. In this era of COVID-19, protecting children online is even more critical. According to the World Economic Forum, internet activity has grown 50% since the pandemic began. Considering that over 90% of the world's school children, including myself, have been hit by some form of school closure, and many of them are taking their education online. Now, this makes it clear that there are a record number of children online at this point in time. And while the enhanced access to internet services has created tremendous opportunities for education, entertainment, and interactions, it has also made children considerably more vulnerable to potential threats, including but not limited to online sexual exploitation, cyberbullying, harmful content, violations of privacy, and the various other things that speakers before me have mentioned. Now, add to the fact that much of the internet activity that is happening today is taking place in an unsupervised manner, and we now have an urgent need for new guidelines and new policies that can work with all parties and all stakeholders to protect children on the internet. And now put another thing into this, the fact that if we go back to our earlier consultation, I think that the ITU has done an exemplary job in working with children of all age groups to formulate the guidelines that will have a real impact on all children. And I would like to say thank you to the ITU for taking this initiative and taking this step of involving children in what you are doing, because protecting children cannot be done without the involvement of children themselves. I am very happy to be with you today, and I now give the floor back to Ms. Doreen to moderate the first part of today's session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adi, and it's a pleasure and honor for me to be able to co-moderate with you. We are inspired by your message, and we're very grateful for your inputs today, but also your inputs as we work together in the development of these guidelines. And you're the voices that we want to hear to make sure that we are, as I mentioned before, targeting the right measures to help protect young people like yourselves. So now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do the first part. Adi's going to do the second part. And what we're going to do is, in the first part, we're going to hear from the main authors of the guidelines. And then the second part, I hand to my co-moderator, and he will take us through some of the points about implementation. And we have 3 honorable ministers joining us for that part of the discussion. So turning to our main authors, they have been dedicating lots of time and putting so much passion into this important work. They've been leading discussions with more than 80 organizations to revise the text and bring their experience, their expertise, and their research to the fore. I'm going to ask them to introduce their respective guidelines, highlight the key messages, and also to further elaborate on how the guidelines can be used by the specific audience. Our time is limited, so I'm going to ask them if they can try to be concise and stay within the 3 minutes. I'm going to start with Olivia first from Child Rights Connect, and Olivia will highlight some of the main parts on the guidelines for children. Olivia, please, over to you.
Thank you, Doreen. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I am Olivia Solari. I am legal officer at the NGO Child Rights Connect. which is a network of more than 90 child rights organizations from all around the world. And together with ECPAT International and the Western Sydney University, we led the working group reviewing the guidelines for children. The new guidelines for children consist of 3 resources, which were developed with inputs from children, just as Aditya just mentioned, and to ensure they are accessible, child-friendly, and that they meet the needs of the different age groups of children. The new guidelines aim to create a space for dialogue between children, their parents, carers, teachers, educators, and their peers, supporting children to deal with the potential risks, while also empowering them to explore the opportunities of the internet. The first resource is a storybook for children under 9 years old. It presents 6 scenarios with questions for children to think about and answer in order to learn about their rights and safety online. Children are guided towards the best solution for each scenario by a mascot, Sango. You might have seen it already, which was designed actually by children. And parents and carers and teachers are encouraged to read the storybook with children, creating a space for discussion and learning about children's rights and the safety online. The second resource is a workbook for children aged 9 to 12 years old. It contains educational activities which children can complete to learn about their rights online and also risks. And children are encouraged to complete these activities either at home with the help of a parent, carer, or at school with the help of a teacher, again creating this space for discussion and learning. Our last resource is a social media campaign and an accompanying mini site for children aged 13 to 18. The social media campaign was launched on Instagram, and it is linked to a mini site which contains both information and challenges for children to complete. And by completing these challenges on the mini site, children will learn how to manage risks online, helping them have a safe and positive experience on the internet. Finally, all these 3 resources that make up the new children's guidelines are designed to complement and to reinforce existing online safety education for children, emphasizing the importance of enabling the full range of children's rights as they relate to the digital environment. Thank you, Doreen.
Okay, thank you, Olivia. I hope you can hear me. I think there was a problem with my audio before. So handing now to Carl. So Carl from InSafe Network. Carl will speak about the guidelines for parents and educators. And I would ask if anyone has comments or questions, you can also send them in on the chat, and we will try to take some time at the end for comments and questions. So Carl, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Doreen, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a real privilege to be here. And as Doreen said, I'm part of the team that coordinates the InSafe network of safer internet centres around Europe. So I was privileged to be chair of the working group, which focused on updating the guidelines for parents and for educators. If I'm honest, it was quite a task. The initial guidelines, were written back in 2009, and of course they've been updated, but things change so quickly, as you all know, in the world of technology. So it was really good to be able to work alongside some of the world experts actually in this space who contributed to the guidelines that have been launched. And specifically, I think it's important just to very quickly mention a couple of people: Sonia Livingston and the Global Kids Online Network, for example, Julia Fossey and Ella Seri from the eSafety Commissioner's Office in Australia. We had input from Lucy Richardson from the International Disability Alliance, who looked at the sort of particular vulnerabilities that some groups of young people will have when they're online. Colleagues from Parent Zone, Carolyn Bunting from Internet Matters, David Wright from the UK Safer Internet Centre, and I think it's important also to mention the amazing team at ITU who helped to coordinate and manage what was quite some process. There were lots of others, but they're listed in the documents, so do have a look. I think it's probably helpful to split the guidelines into two sections for a moment, since they cover both parents and educators. And I think, these are the people at the front line, and the guidelines recognize the crucial role that they play in supporting children and young people to use the internet safely, but also to maximize its potential. Other speakers have already mentioned the benefits, and I think we mustn't lose sight of those. So for parents, I think the guidelines are intended to be useful for individual parents or carers or guardians, and to provide some practical advice on things that they can do to keep their own children safe online. That's what parents want. What can they do in their own home with their own devices? But all of that is fine. I think we also need to recognize that no matter how good a parent might be at doing all of this stuff and looking after what's happening in their house, when their children are somewhere else, at a friend's house and so on, those other parents will not be doing it in the same way if they are doing it at all. Hence, it's important, I think, that children and young people are able to have an open dialogue. Easy to say, not that easy to do. There is some guidance in the document which sort of helps with this. So I think a key message for parents and carers is to listen. To try not to overreact. Children need to have somebody that they can turn to when things will inevitably go wrong online. And ideally, they would do this with a trusted adult. But we also want to empower young people and give them the skills and the tools that they need to keep themselves safe. For educators, there's a wealth of information in the guidelines about what children and young people are doing online, as well as information on what schools should be doing in terms of education around online safety, as well as changes that they might want to make to infrastructure, to policy, to help pupils stay safe when they're connected. That said, the guidelines are also intended to be useful for those who are tasked with the creation of policy around online safety in schools and with families. There are checklists in there that provide a baseline, a kind of set of minimum standards, I suppose, which could be considered. And I think these guidelines, used in conjunction with the policymakers' guidelines, which we'll hear more about in a moment, that they really provide a toolkit for governments, for nations, for organizations who want to take a holistic approach to child online safety. So you'll find in there links to the latest research around the world, as well as signposting to a wealth of resources in national languages, focusing on different aspects of online safety. So, do read the whole document if you have time, but equally, I think dip in and out for the things that you might need. And we just hope that it will be a really useful tool for a range of audiences working at different levels in this space. Thank you.
Super, thank you so much, Carl. As a parent of 4 very digitally active teenagers, I certainly welcome the guidelines myself. Thank you for that. Now we're going to shift to industry, the guidelines for industry, and we have Anjan with us from who's a child protection specialist. So Anjan, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Doreen. Hello, everyone. On behalf of UNICEF, I had the privilege of chairing the revision work that was related to the guidelines for industry. Let me first start by thanking all the subgroup members consisting of some of the key industry representatives, special initiatives such as the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children, the International Disability Alliance, my UNICEF colleagues, and to ITU colleagues for their very active engagement and valuable contribution for this entire work. The tech sector has a vital role to play in the collective efforts to protect children online. The previous COP guideline was an important reference for them, but as we all know, things evolve very fast in the online realm, with new services, features, and new actors emerging constantly. The dynamic nature of the online platforms, services, and how they are delivered and consumed definitely necessitated a dynamic approach for the guidelines to remain meaningful. I will briefly go through some of the key aspects of these revised guidelines. Firstly, we wanted the document to represent a holistic response based on children's rights, which balances their rights to protection from violence, exploitation, and abuse with their right to participation and play and to freedom of expression. I think this was highlighted by my previous speakers as well. We need to see the whole technology domain as an enabler and not only, as something evil. While the focus on prevention and response to some of the severe forms of harm, such as sexual abuse and exploitation, has been maintained and enhanced, other forms of harm, such as those resulting from breach of privacy, self-harm, peer-to-peer violence, has also been included. The revision also benefited from more nuanced treatment of issues such as online gaming and digital marketing for children. The second key aspect factor in the rapid changes that is associated with the internet technologies, which enables new services to be developed by companies that can vary quite widely in terms of their size, capacity, resources, as well as the jurisdictions under which they operate. In this regard, the guidelines aim to provide key general principles on child online protection that are meaningful, practical, and applicable to even smaller companies and new actors entering the online ecosystem. A major restructuring has been done with the sector-specific checklist to provide more granular option based on the type of services offered by the companies. And some of these include those that provide connectivity, data storage, and hosting services, those who offer curated digital content, those who offer user-generated content and connected users, and also the AI-driven systems. Considering the evolving nature of these digital technologies, in particular the application of artificial intelligence becoming more universal, a separate section including a corresponding checklist has been added to this. And my special thanks to my policy colleagues at UNICEF for their valuable contribution on this. Finally, and very importantly, from the beginning of this revision exercise, we wanted the guidelines to be owned and utilized by the companies themselves as a guiding tool and as a reference document, to take inspiration from other co-actors and contribute towards the betterment of the guide itself. We are thankful to all industry actors who have contributed with specific examples throughout the document that reflects how the specific guidelines transform into action, which we hope will be very valuable for every industry actor to embrace and fulfill their role in the protection of children online. So I'll stop here and over to you, Doreen.
Thank you so much, Anjan, and we're grateful as always for the support of UNICEF in all of our work. Now turning to David on the policy side, the guidelines for policymakers. I have David from the UK Safer Internet Centre. David.
Doreen, thank you very much. I hope everyone can now hear me. So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. It's been my pleasure, my privilege to have led and indeed represent the team responsible for updating and revising the policymaker guidelines. These are a result, as others have said, of the contributions from a number of individuals and organisations from across the world who have willingly given their time. So I'd like to extend my thanks to all of those involved, as well as obviously, as has been mentioned, the ITU Child Online Protection team, without whom none of this would have been possible. The policymaker guidelines propose a response to the global challenge of child online protection, which requires a global approach based on harmonised and inclusive national strategies on child online protection. The guidelines propose concrete recommendations on delivering a national strategy on child online protection, provide tools to identify key stakeholders to engage with and coordinate efforts, as well as alignment with existing national frameworks and strategy plans. I would just like, just for a moment, just to, as a reminder really as well, in terms of the scope of child online protection, and that child online protection in this context extends to any harm that children are exposed to online, covering a broad range of risks that threaten the safety and well-being of children. Clearly is a complex challenge that must be approached from multiple angles, including legislation, governance, education, policy, and society. That's why all these guidelines are particularly important. In terms of the structure of the revision of the guidelines, they consider relevant research, existing models and material, and set out clear recommendations for the development of national child online protection strategies, broken down into 6 different sections. The first section introduces the subject. Section 2 introduces child online protection and gives an insight into recent research, including aspects regarding new and emerging technologies, key threats and harms to children. Section 3 sets out how to prepare for a national child online protection strategy, including relevant stakeholders, those to engage with, existing examples of responses to online threats and harms, and benefits of having a national strategy. Section 4 covers recommendations for frameworks and implementation. And Section 5, which I think is particularly helpful, outlines a national checklist to develop a national child online protection strategy, with Section 6 including further reading and reference materials. Over recent years, it's been my privilege to have seen the impact of these guidelines firsthand, working on behalf of the ITU with different governments. And this has been with the implementation and using these guidelines to structure the direction and development of national child online protection reports for each of these particular countries. It's been wonderful to see these countries act on the ITU report recommendations with actions and with activities that move child online protection on in their particular countries. In terms of concrete efforts, and as an example, it's included the creation of national steering committees to identify and involve all stakeholders to direct and orchestrate action nationally, working with industry to provide tools within countries for parents to help safeguard their children. These are just two small examples about how these guidelines and the culmination, the conclusions of recommendations that will result in strategy in terms of actions for policymakers. A number of national and regional initiatives are already underway to utilise these policymaker guidelines and the other guidelines as well, and would encourage everybody to look at these, to review them, and to adopt them. That's what indeed we're calling for. And as already been said, never has this work been as important as it is right now. It's certainly in terms of the impact of the pandemic, but on an ongoing basis, the world essentially has changed, and now is the time to act. Doreen, thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you, David. Excellent. So now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to shift a little bit to look at the approach that was taken in the development of these guidelines. And I'm going to turn to John from ECPAT International to talk to us about the role of the multi-stakeholder approach and how important that was in this review process. John, over to you.
So yeah, this was, again, it was a great delight and a privilege to represent ECPAT International in the work. Specifically, we helped with drafting the guidelines for children, which you've already heard introduced in some detail by Olivia. And I have to say, Olivia and Professor Amanda Ferd from the Australia in Sydney, the University of Western Australia, did by far the lion's share of the work. And one of the key things that they did, which in my experience, it has been very unusual for the ITU, is that they organized workshops with children in different countries to test the texts, test the cartoon images, and test the materials that we prepared and that were published today. And that was a very taxing, a very time-consuming, a very intense process, but I think it greatly enriches the end product, because this isn't, these guidelines aren't really, they're not what we older folks think ought to be the messages. They're not being presented in a way which we older folks think they ought to be presented. They are very much a product of a great set of inputs from children themselves, from different cultures in different parts of the world. And I might just add, by the way, that the cartoon characters that you can see if you look at the booklet was itself produced by children. There was a competition and it was judged, and this was the winning icon. So I think these guidelines should be and will be very, very valuable in lots of different cultural settings, lots of different legal environments, in lots of different countries in the world. And it was a great honor to be part of the process on behalf of ECPAT International.
Thank you so much, John. And now we're going to hear from Amanda from Western Sydney University. Please, Amanda, if you'd like to share some quick thoughts on the approach and how that was useful in the process, please.
Thanks very much, Doreen, and thank you everyone for being here. I don't want to echo too much of what has already been said about these guidelines, but it was really our intention to really centre children's insights and ways of experiencing online safety, to try to pull together some resources that would resonate with them, children in different cultures across the globe. And so we were very grateful to have input from children. And we're really, really excited to put these resources into children's hands. But as we know, the availability of resources does not solve in itself the problem of online safety, and it's really going to take a whole of community approach to really activate these resources. So I guess I would just wrap up very quickly by saying it's been a great honour to be part of this process, and now I'm really excited to work with many of you to see that we can put these resources in children's hands and help make a change. Thanks.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Amanda. So we really do hope, as our speakers have noted, that governments and industry players can embrace, can adopt these guidelines and become leaders and champions in their own regions. Before we shift to the implementation, I have two requests for the floor. I have Mr. Cliff Manning from Parent Zone, and then I have the e-Safety Commissioner from Australia, Julie Fossey, that requested to make a brief intervention. If we could try to limit it to 1 minute, that would be great. So let's hear from Cliff first. Please, Cliff.
Hello, thank you. Just to be very brief, thank you to all the previous speakers. So just to add to the comments today, at Parent Zone, we've been very honoured to help shape the guidelines for families and educators, a really important piece of work that is the result of a huge amount of work, and it's fantastic to see them going live today. But I think, as Amanda pointed out, the next challenge is how those guidelines can be brought to life and applied in practice in meaningful ways. And I think that's the key to long-term impact. One of the other things that was launched along with the guidelines is a case study, a case study about DigiWorld that was launched today and is also available on the ITU CEOP website. And this is an example of how projects working with really great partners can deliver real impact, and how the practical application of the guidelines in policy, process, design and deployment can have real impact. We'd like to say thanks to Telenor Group and their business units in Thailand, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Malaysia, Myanmar, as well as UNICEF, Plan International, but especially all the schools, education partners, families and children who helped to develop and test and shape these resources and made it possible. I hope that you'll have a look at the case study, hope that you'll find it helpful for the work that you're doing to implement these guidelines in different settings. And we'd be happy to share more and help wherever possible. So thank you very much and good luck with the rollout of the next part.
Thank you very much, Cliff. And now we're going to turn to Julia, the e-Safety Commissioner from Australia. Thank you for staying up so late for us this evening. Julia, over to you for a quick intervention, please.
Thank you very much. And the Australian e-Safety Commissioner really welcomes the launch of these COP guidelines. And as the world's first government agency solely dedicated to tackling online abuse and keeping its citizens safe online, our experience really shows that a four-pronged approach of regulation, prevention, intervention and harm minimisation across government, industry and civil society has really enabled positive outcomes for children here in Australia. And our experience shows that a multi-pronged and holistic approach underpinned by children's rights can really lead to positive and impactful social change. And this multifaceted approach is really reflected in the guidelines and recommendations that ITU have published yesterday. And these guidelines really provide us all with quite a solid foundation as we all work towards developing a safe and empowering digital environment for children and young people. And we're just really looking forward to working with the ITU and alongside our global partners in ensuring that children and young people can safely access the opportunities that the digital environment can and should provide. And these COP guidelines can really act as a catalyst for us all to act and implement their recommendations. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. So we have heard implementation is key. We must act now. And with that, Ati, I'm going to hand over to you to tell us how we're going to get it done. So let's move to the second part on making it happen, the implementation. Aditya, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Doreen. And once again, thank you to all the previous speakers for giving us a fresh and reassuring overview of the efforts made to revise the guidelines. Now, this session will focus on what the next steps are and what needs to be done in order to have some concrete actions. But before we move on to that, I would like to show everyone present that I'm not alone in this call. I'm one of hundreds and thousands of children and fellow young people, and this is what we have to say.
We are your here. We are your future. Protect us. Empower us. Join us.
That was an excellent video, and I hope that with their voices in mind, we can take the steps needed for concrete results. I would now like to give the floor to Ms. Doreen once again to present her plans for how these guidelines will be implemented.
Thank you so much. I'm going to be very brief because we really want to hear from the other speakers. We did put together these tools for you to use widely and to start concrete and measurable activities on the ground. What we will be doing from our side is ramping up a global program where the ITU, together with our partners, start to focus on the policy development and capacity building front. We will be working with all interested players on the policy front, really to accelerate the development and the adoption of a sound child online protection strategy and a comprehensive action plan for governments, and also looking at improving online safety measures and tools. And on the capacity building side, we are looking to engage with others to build capacity by running self-paced programs for train-the-trainer modules that have the aim to empower children, parents, teachers, and we're also looking at developing open source solutions to make digital content, information, and skills available to children, teachers, and administrators. So with that, Atia, I'm going to hand back to you, and just to say that as we move to this implementation part, we really do want to engage with all stakeholders, and we look forward to working with many of you that have joined us today. So back over to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Doreen. Now, those are some excellent plans, and we hope that you can work together with other organizations to make this a global program with real success. However, we know that strong government actions and initiatives will be key to protecting children online, and this is particularly relevant for the African region, where there's a few things about children that I would like to share with you. Firstly is the fact that the child population in Africa will reach 1 billion by 2055, making the world's largest child populations. From 2017 onwards, sub-Saharan Africa is the region with the highest number of births, and this is a trend that will continue to persist for the rest of the century. This, coupled with the fact that Africa is undergoing a rapid growth and much higher rates of internet proliferation, it is now critical to move to protect children online. And this cannot be done without government actions, and we'll be deliberating on how the COP guidelines can be implemented on the national level. Firstly, I would like to invite Her Excellency, the Minister of Communications of Ghana, to take the floor.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be part of this program this morning. And I must congratulate the ITU and all your partners for the amount of work that has gone into developing these guidelines. And it couldn't have come at a better time for us in Ghana. We do have a national child online policy protection and strategy, and we have developed a framework to implement it, as it is one of the key priority areas for us in the development of our cybersecurity ecosystem. As more children go online, and we've seen the indices from around the world that for Africa, it's a very fertile opportunity for us in terms of online education and all that, but that exposes even more children to the dangers online. And so it's imperative that we put in place the necessary measures to safeguard their online experience. We are in the process of reviewing our national COP framework. And I can assure participants that, as I indicated, the development of this framework has come at a very timely time for us, because we will incorporate it into the new revised COP framework that we are developing. We've also instituted several awareness programs, and we would incorporate this guidelines into the annual cybersecurity awareness program, which is dubbed A Safer Digital Ghana. And it is aimed at building capacity and raising awareness on cybercrime and improving cybersecurity amongst children, the public, businesses, and government. We need to adopt a multi-stakeholder approach and bring aboard key stakeholders with a mandate on COP, and even deepen the collaboration that we already have. And we've worked with UNICEF, we've worked with several civil society organizations. Children themselves, they prefer to be called young adults now and not children, as we were told at the last cybersecurity awareness and child online protection meetings that we had with them. As part of our Africa Safer Internet Day celebrations as well, we've worked with school children across board. Now that most schools are on vacation, we need to figure out how we're going to have continuing engagement with them, because many more of them are working online, playing online, communicating online than they even were when they were in schools. And so it's even more imperative now that we deepen engagements with them. And I'm glad that these guidelines were developed in consultation with children across the globe. So their input has led into the final effort. We would work with the children themselves, their parents. And we shouldn't also forget that many parents are not as computer savvy as their children are. And so they need some hand-holding to be able to know exactly how to protect their children online. Sometimes in these conversations, we assume that everybody understands the issues as much as we do. And so educating the parents is as important as teaching the children themselves. We can't do it alone, assuming that we know what to do. And so putting in place the framework to have constant engagement with all stakeholders will be critical to understand the different roles that they need to play in the operationalization of the guidelines. And we're looking forward to incorporating this into our framework, working with other stakeholders. We are also reviewing or implementing, well, in the process of passing cybersecurity legislation at the moment. It's currently before Cabinet, and we hope to get it into Parliament before long. And that has provisions on criminalization of practices which militate against the safety of children online. And we believe that with the sanctions that are to be introduced, which are fairly stiff, coupled with public education as well, we will go a long way towards creating a safer digital space for our children to engage online. Specific online sexual conduct involving children, cyberbullying, and all of those conduct has been criminalized in the proposed bill. And we're hoping to, we have already had broad engagement, stakeholder engagements in the development of the legal framework and had consensus as to the measures that we propose to put in place. And so we're confident that it will receive support across board and enable us to put in place the legal and regulatory framework to protect our children. We need to cultivate a network of virtual safety conscious Ghanaians and Africans. We're not going to stop engaging online and using the internet. It's even more imperative now that we put in place the framework to do so safely and in a healthy manner. We can't do it alone at the national level, knowing that we're part of a global ecosystem. And so we would welcome regional and continental level collaboration and working with the African Union, the ITU, and other partners, including the Smart Africa initiative. We hope to develop an African cyberspace which is safe for African children to engage in as they live and work more online. And so we're looking forward to webinars like this, now that we can't have physical contact, but online and virtual meetings at which we can learn from the experiences of others and share ours as well. In our celebration of the African Safer Internet Day earlier this year. We involved about 5,000 young people and several programs which were very well received, both within the catchment area within which that was done and nationally, and helped create a lot of awareness about safer practices and cyber hygienic practices as our children engage more online. We need to do many more such engagements in a safe, socially and physically distant manner as we educate the youth, parents, policymakers, and industry players on child online activities in the region and proper mitigating measures to them. We're looking forward to mainstreaming these guidelines into our own framework and engaging more with our peers in the African region and beyond as we work to develop a safer cyberspace for our children, which will promote more peace of mind for all parents and caregivers and adults and engage children as well. Thank you, ITU, for leading this initiative. And we're extremely grateful to the partners that collaborated with you in this effort. And it is quite comforting to know that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we can take these guidelines, adapt them to suit our purposes, and work with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. You've explained really well, and it's really important, I believe, that all countries, especially in regions where the child population will grow and will access the internet so much more, it's very important that governments in these regions work to protect those children. Now, I'd like to invite Her Excellency, the Minister of Information, Communications, Technology, and Innovation of Rwanda.
Thank you, Aditya. I want to start by thanking Doreen and the ITU team, and also congratulating you for launching these very important guidelines that are needed more than ever, given the current times that we're living in. And also wanted to express, my thanks also to Queen Sylvia for championing such a noble and timeless cause. Child online protection has always been an area that requires urgent and deliberative attention. But right now, it has become a matter of emergency. And if I may exaggerate a little bit, a matter of life and death, because as the previous speakers rightly said, if it's not taken care of, then we are subjecting our kids to lifelong disabilities as well as mental health issues. But we can no longer afford to take a lot of our time building consensus among stakeholders, conducting consultations. We just need to move fast. And I think having such practical guidelines that help us to put in place the right measures that will enable us to curb online harmful activities can only, we can only ask that we all, play our role in just, implementing some of these measures. We do welcome the ITU 2020 guidelines for child online protection that seek to address concerns that whether it's governments, parents, the society, educators around us, that we all have when it comes to creating a safe and empowering environment for our kids. The internet is both a learning and a socialization platform for our children, for the youth, even for ourselves, where we're increasingly using these digital platforms to communicate, to engage, as well as learn and play. Very specifically for Rwanda, we've made significant investments when it comes to improving access to these digital technologies, especially for children within schools. However, this 21st century exposure that as governments and parents and society we're excited to engage our children into comes with fears and concerns. Around this harmful content, conduct, as well as contact that happens when people are, when our lives have shifted online. The internet is borderless. So are the platforms and information that is powered by by the internet. Just like internet governance has required a collaboration across jurisdictions, across countries, across multiple stakeholders, so does child online protection require wider collaboration to ensure that the safety and well-being of our children is taken care of adequately. as ITU launches the 2020 guidelines for child online protection, it actually is a good coincidence for us as Rwanda because it comes exactly a year ago when we put in place our child online protection policy, which is really a governance framework that helps us to coordinate, plan, and monitor the implementation of all these child online protection measures. And more recently, when we were all faced with this pandemic, we put in place quickly a child protection awareness campaign where we were working with different stakeholders, the industry. UNICEF has been a great partner in this, in just mobilizing and creating awareness in what our role as parents, as educators, as governments, as policymakers, even as children is in really making sure that we are staying safe online. And I like, Aditya, what you said earlier when you said for Africa, there may be there's a uniqueness to even the kind of issues that we're dealing with. As I listened to all the guidelines that have been developed, I can only say we also need, particularly for Africa and any other economies, where you also have caretakers that are not necessarily educators and parents that spend the bulk of time with our children and even thinking about how do we create content that is appropriate for them, because many of them are not even as exposed or as educated as their parents and the teachers at school. So this is where we'll see that kind of uniqueness happening, but I'm also very pleased to see that even for ITU in developing the guidelines, that deliberate attention to having age-appropriate content means that even as we borrow from these guidelines and customize them to our own context, we can then also look at some of the other brackets of, of groups that haven't been catered for. So we continue to work with our different, the industry at large, because we need them as they develop apps to be aware of this. How are they building measures for this? We've created a toll-free hotline that is managed by a National Children Council, where some of these inappropriate activities are reported and followed on. It's really a joint collaboration, and we're grateful that we now even have these guidelines, because once we have a policy in place, we then have guidelines that we can build off from and quickly have the right measures put in place. So as a policymaker, but also as a mother, I believe in the necessity of this initiative. And we're looking forward to continuing this partnership with ITU and the different stakeholders, UNICEF, as we implement these guidelines and we continue to ensure a safer space for our children. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And not just as a moderator, I would like to say as a child, and I believe every single child on this planet shares this sentiment. Thank you for taking these concrete actions to protect children. And thank you for ensuring that the internet, which is a huge opportunity, is also safe for us children. Now, I'd like to invite the Cabinet Secretary of the Ministry of Information, Communications and Technology of Kenya to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharma, and Your Majesty, Doreen, and Your Excellencies, my fellow colleague ministers. Thank you for inviting me, and on behalf of the Kenyan government, I also want to thank the ITU for the new COP directions that you've given for us. It comes as my colleagues have said, at a very, very timely time. COVID-19 has now pushed almost everybody online, even in our rural areas. I'm very pleased to see we have over 283 participants on this call, which is great to see the kind of collaboration that technology can provide and the amount of time that it actually saves for us. As a country, in 2010 we had a new constitution, and in the new constitution, Article 53 just focuses primarily on children's rights, children's protection, in all the different areas of life, including now online. For us, we've got cultural practices that sometimes affect children, whether it's the early marriages or FGM or any of these things that, including child labor. And so protection of children is not new. It's something that we have ingrained in society. And what happened is technology has come and even made it more complicated. So for example, some of the parents will share information as to where is it you can go and get your children either circumcised or to work. And again, they're using the social media or other digital platforms. So we have ensured that in all our laws, starting with the Constitution, the data protection laws, the computer and cybercrime laws, all the laws that we put in place, there is specific attention paid to protection of children, especially on use of all these digital services, whether it is the mobile network or actually being able to go online and use these services. And we've looked at, we have the Children's Protection Act number 8 of 2001, as well as the Sexual Offences Act of 2006. We combine those with the more recent laws that we put in place, and we have seen that now the key message from our end is to go out and really educate, whether it is teachers, parents, caregivers, all the different people that engage and interact with our children. Obviously, all of us, if we do not take care of our children, then our future is lost. And so there's a lot of effort that has been put in. And for us, protection includes even the programming on TV content, as well as what you see within the different online platforms. I will avoid duplicating what my colleagues have said. I think on the continent, we share a lot. And so I'm really happy to see them here also sharing the same. There's a passion that we have seen from our current leaders in ensuring that we protect our children, in ensuring that the laws that we put in place will specifically, make the penalties very, very high for anybody that is caught, so that then it becomes a serious deterrent for them. And we have been very pleased that we've collaborated in many years with ITU and with many of the other development partners, UNICEF as well. And in that way, we're being able to see at least more people are getting educated on how to use the technologies, on how to safeguard the technologies, but more importantly, the law enforcement agencies, how they can get access to the data, access to logs, so that when they present those to the judiciary is able to immediately action. And, it's not cases where these are prolonged cases that take a long time to deal with. The law is very specific and very clear for us. And so the COP 2020 guidelines that have now come really will help us in really expanding this area. We continue to work closely, as I've said, and hopefully this will then ensure that we have a safer space for our children. So let me not repeat what everyone has said before, but just to say we align and are very pleased to be part of this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. If my math from earlier in the day is correct, then I believe there could be well over 15 million child internet users in the country of Kenya. And I believe your work is exceptional and critical to protecting each and every single one of those children. Now, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Al-Zaruni, the chair of the Council Working Group on Child Online Protection, to tell us more about the importance of coordinated action and how member states can be engaged in the implementation of these guidelines. Mr. Al-Zaruni.
Thank you, Aditya. And I would like to thank everyone who worked on these guidelines for their great efforts that we were proudly following through the Council Working Group on Child Online Protection in ITU. I believe that to have an effective implementation of a child online protection program, coordination should be at every step of it, both at the national and the international levels. So what usually happens from what I have seen in many countries approaching this topic is that the governmental entity that leads the ICT in a country would realize the importance of child online protection, and they would start raising awareness, building capabilities, and providing tools in this regard. After some time, the regulatory entities would start focusing on this subject as well, issuing a law and making some efforts on their own. The same thing happens with other governmental entities and NGOs, each making tremendous, remarkable efforts, but by their own, leading to redundancy with unclear impact. As you know, child online protection includes technical, regulatory, and capability building aspects, as well as cooperation. So if we want to implement it effectively, all concerned stakeholders must work together under an integrated national strategy or framework that identifies the goals at the national level and set the roles and responsibilities of each entity clearly. Well, how do we effectively do that? This is where these outstanding child online protection that were yesterday released, child online protection guidelines, come into play. For example, the COP guidelines for policymakers give a clear view of what the COP strategy should contain and the best ways to implement it on the ground, taking into account the diversity of tools and partners who can do the job. Link this guideline with the other 3 guidelines, and you will be able to create an effective strategy and a framework on the national level. Now, this is the same very concept of coordination applies to the regional level as well. Countries within the same region that share the same culture, values, usually face the same risks. So countries could benefit from the experience from each other, creating regional initiative and sharing the materials that they have created so that other countries wouldn't need to create them over again. Especially if some countries are already advanced on this aspect, they can help their neighboring countries by funding their programs or providing the expertise. But that could be taken to the next level by creating a regional strategy, program, and initiative that would be much more effective, as I would think. Thank you so much. That's what I wanted to share, to just capitalize on the efforts and the importance of cooperation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Al-Zaruni. Now, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Bocar Ba, the CEO of Samina Telecommunications Council, who has worked extensively to partner industry and governments to create a sustainable ICT environment and digital economy. Mr. Ba, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Aditya, and congratulations on your excellent leadership for moderating this discussion. Your Majesty, Excellencies, expert colleague, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's my privilege to be among you and today and to help voice one of the most important and sensitive area requiring an open discussion. And for us as member of the ICT community, also as parent and as a member of the civil society. I'm delighted to be a part of this discussion today, which aim, and it was mentioned by the BDT director, which aim to accelerate actions from all stakeholders on child online protection. This issue must be addressed with the sense of utmost urgency, and that has been repeated by many of my colleagues speakers. We are already late. Now, to put things into perspective, I just wanted very quickly to give you an idea about the scale of this issue. Just let's remember 2 facts to make it simple. Today, more than 1.5 billion children and young people have been affected by school closures worldwide during the COVID-19 pandemic. That's one fact. The second point that we have to remember, spending more time on virtual platforms can leave children vulnerable to exploitation, including exposures to unsuitable material and online sexual abuse, and the predators capitalize on the COVID-19 pandemic. So as such, when we look at the current situation, the ITU updated child online protection guidelines serve an important and timely purpose and are direly needed to be endorsed and implemented by as many relevant stakeholders as possible. Therefore, from the private sector perspective, addressing the child online protection issue is a sustainability issue, is fundamental to create healthy and progressive society. That's number one. But it's also an integral part of our Sustainable Development Agenda. And I'm referring to the SDG goal 16.2, which is in fact ending all form of violence against children. Now, Aditya asked me a very simple question: what's the role of the private sector? And we can frame it into two different things. What private sector should do, ideally? Private sector, I'm talking about networks operators, social platform, gaming operators. They should have suitable technologies in place, such as artificial intelligence, data analytics, data pattern analysis that can detect child abuse material and prevent offender from using them. That's an example of what should be done by the industry. Technology providers, including network operators, they need to ensure that they are in constant collaboration mode. What does it mean? It means that they have to continue upgrading and addressing technology level vulnerability with their peers. It's a second example. ISPs should remove child sexual abuse material from public view completely as soon as they become aware of the material, and in that regard, artificial intelligence can play an important role. I can keep going on and on. Internet access providers should engage very actively with law enforcement agencies by developing together SOPs for reporting and completely eradicating material that are harmful to children and identify at the same time the offenders. So as I mentioned, we do not have much time, so the industry can do a lot. Now, addressing directly your question, what are we doing currently right now? So what is being done? These issues are not new to us, and it has already been taken care of by a number of large companies. I am based in Dubai. Our operator, Etisalat, which is one of the largest in the region, has integrated child online protection within their corporate social responsibility. They have heavily invested in initiatives. One of them is a concrete tool that has been designed to help parents, family understand what, for example, is cyberbullying and what it feels like. So they have created, just to name it, Etisalat anti-bullying chatbot. That's one example. The second one is they have created an internet safer day. So basically, during 4 days, they change the name of the network on the mobile phone for promoting child online safety. This is in the UAE, but I can take an example of another operator in the Middle East, Zain Group, who is the co-chair at the Broadband Commission with Joanna that we have heard earlier. Zain also has taken a number of initiatives that I have listed at the beginning of my talk when I was referring to what the industry should do. A third one in Saudi Arabia, it has been announced last December that one of the top 2 priority in the kingdom by the minister is child online protection. So the entire kingdom is engaging in actions and hand in hand with the telecom operators. And one of them, Saudi Telecom Group, has already developed some very friendly applications that are helping children, families to have more awareness and promote easy download, for example, from YouTube to make internet a better place to live. So we can list a number of actions that have been taken by the private sector. However, when we come, and I will conclude on that, when we look at the guidelines that have been provided today by the ITU, and congratulations for the great work that has been done by them, I believe these guidelines, if it is aligned with the private sector, we can come up to some global standards that could be implementable on one hand by government, on the other hand by the private sector. So, my dear Aditya, this is the key message I wanted to share with you and with our audience. Congratulations to Her Majesty the Queen for championing this cause. Doreen, congratulations on this launch today. And I look forward to meeting all of you colleagues. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ba. And yes, you answered my question, but it's an important question that we all need an answer to. And thank you for giving a good reply to that question. Now, I'd like to ask for two of our partners, UNESCO, represented by Mr. Chakrun, and the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children, represented by Mrs. Manojlovic, to make a 1-minute intervention from the floor.
Thank you, and good afternoon to you. Good afternoon, Your Majesty and my colleague Doreen. Let me first of all voice our support and alignment to the work that the ITU colleagues have been doing, and congratulate all of us for the adoption and publication of the Child Online Protection Guidelines. This is really an asset for all of us. And in the 1 minute that I have, I would like to frame how we see this and how we would like to take forward the guidelines. First of all, we see this work as part of an important and wider work that has to be done on protecting everybody in a lifelong learning perspective. And we see it as part of the right to education. The COVID-19 crisis showed how much it's important to protect learners' data and privacy, and to protect online access. So for us, this is part of the right to education. Second, is part of the right to protect learners now and in a lifelong and life-wide perspective. Protecting learners today can affect their future, be it socio-emotional, be it their learning opportunities, be it their career as well. So it's important to think also about the lifelong learning and life-wide perspective. There is a third point which is very critical for us. As UNESCO, we are leading work on ethical use of artificial intelligence and data analytics, and the previous speaker was referring to it. Protecting learners, protecting child online, and using in an ethical way data analytics, artificial intelligence, other technologies that are emerging is part of the discussion and part of the agenda that we are having. Maybe last point from my side is that, and again, it refers to the previous speaker, we need a multi-stakeholder, multi-actor. UNESCO, end of March, launched the Global Education Coalition, where ITU has been one of the founding partners and other organizations that are today in the meeting. The Global Education Coalition is aiming to leave no one behind in terms of learning. But the migration to online created a major challenge on how we protect the child while they are learning, how we protect them from bullying, but also protect their privacy and their security. We see the Global Education Coalition as a multi-stakeholders, and we have the edtech industry, we have civil society, we have academia. It's important that we take those guidelines to the Global Education Coalition and see how we can advance it, how we can make it happen in reality on the ground with member states, with the partner organization, and with all the stakeholders that are concerned with the child protection, be it online but also offline. And our work is to advance this agenda. But our aim is really to make this part of our work on the right to education, and we would like to see all the partners involved in this joining us for that. Thank you very much for the invitation, and good luck for all of us. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Your Majesty, Doreen, all the colleagues, thank you so much for making the time for us now and for doing this amazing work. I just want to refer to something that Doreen said at the beginning, that connectivity is critical, and connectivity has been the hero of the COVID-19 crisis, but it has shown us how important it is for children to have the opportunity and choice, but also safety and protection. And I think we in the Global Partnership are really happy to work with all the colleagues here, with our 500 partners, to make sure the digital world is truly safe for children. And how we plan to take this work forward, as you know, we are the only global entity who makes investments in specific interventions to tackle online child sexual exploitation and abuse. We are investing in programs and cutting edge technology tools. And we are also this year reaching 70 countries with the 50 million investments that we have, including the amazing work that is being done in Ghana, in Kenya, and Rwanda, and across the world. What we are hearing through this network of grantees and partners is that they are really lacking practical guidance on how to better collaborate, how to implement policies, how to really formulate and design interventions to make children safe online. And I really think that this work on child online protection guidelines will help us disseminate this information to right channels throughout our network and the partnership. So we're really look forward to doing that. I just finally want to say a huge thank you to my team who also worked with all the partners, specifically Serena Tomazino and Amy Crocker, who is not with us anymore, but who have really given so much effort to make this work also impactful as possible. So thank you all.
Thank you very much to both of the speakers. And now I'd like to turn the floor to our chat and to ask my colleague, Ms. Carla, to share with us a question that the amazing audience has for us today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adi. And again, thank you everyone, because the chat was actually incredible. We hope that we can really capture all the great comments and inputs in order to accordingly. But one of course, there was lots of reference and around the role of AI and how AI technologies can really help to advance child online safety issues. There was a lot in terms of on the importance, lots of comments in terms of the importance of contextualizing the guidelines, and here what are the advice to be sure that we capture the real needs of children and young users. And then there were many questions around how are we going to measure whether policymakers would follow the guidelines, and what are some of the frameworks that we can put in place to make policymakers accountable. So that's all. Adi, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Speakers would like to answer. Okay, I can see Miss Joanna has her hand up. All right, Miss Joanna, the floor is yours. I'm sorry, you're muted. Yep.
Not anymore. Thank you so much. I think it has been an incredibly rich discussion, and what I was most inspired by was really the leadership of many of the governments and the ministers who joined this conversation today. It shows the commitment. But as everybody understands, we need to have some accountability tools. How are we going not just to measure how we are doing, but how are we going to keep the governments, the private sector, and even the NGOs accountable? And I think there is a couple of tools. So one, which I mentioned earlier, is the Economist Intelligence Unit Index, which looks also at the response, not just the governments, but also the private sector in terms of keeping children safe online. The other one important report is the annual report of the state of the broadband that the ITU UNESCO Broadband Commission is releasing each year. And the recommendation last year was that by 2021, all countries should have measures to keep children safe online in their digital national plans. That's the step one. Let's see if they are really going to have, and how many of the countries are not going to have implemented those plans. So I think that all the resources that have been launched, if we just could use these two tools, it would help us to advance the agenda. We have to measure.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Rubenstein. Now I would like to invite, I see the hand, Mr. David, and after that, Mr. Anajan, to answer the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So it's David Wright on behalf of the policymaker guidelines. So I think in terms of the guidelines, and this is in response, I think, to the question that's been posed about how how policymakers are held accountable, if you like. So I'm just going to read a small section from the guidelines. So clearly, the guidelines and the initiatives calls on all stakeholders to implement policies and strategies that will protect children in cyberspace and promote their safer access to the amazing opportunities that it affords. So in terms of holding them account, that's difficult. There clearly will be is an encouragement. The thing that I would very much advocate, and probably on behalf of the other streams as well, working groups as well, in terms of involving children, involving and so talking to children and getting their views, that will certainly help to hold policymakers to account, I think, as well. And this, whether that extends into some of the academic reviews and work on an ongoing basis, as Joanna said, to measure the implementation and indeed the impact of the Child Online Protection Guidelines across the board. That is certainly something that I think will be of great interest to policymakers and indeed others, about how they're implemented and how we more effectively have used the guidelines to protect children online. Back to you.
All right, thank you very much. Now I would like to invite Mr. Anajan to answer the question.
Thanks, Aditya. I think the only point I would add here is that, first of all, before this to be actually used, we need to make the necessary stakeholders aware of this, that it exists, and that we need to bring within the existing strategies and the work that we do at the national level and regional level on child prevention of violence in general. So basically, we need to factor in that this is not a standalone, separate effort. This has to be kind of embedded in our work when we work with these policymakers at a national and regional level in developing strategies for violence prevention in a holistic format. And in terms of monitoring and measuring the application and usage of these policies, obviously it's a matter of how those strategies evolve. There are different mechanisms that exist. For example, the We Protect Model National Response, which brings in, even though it doesn't have an accountability framework as such, but it's a core framework that's been widely used now to prevent sexual abuse and exploitation online.
Thank you very much. Sorry for the late reply. There was some trouble unmuting. Now, first of all, thank you very much to everyone. I would especially like to thank Her Majesty for her time and invaluable contribution to the dialogue. As I wrote in the chat earlier, your voice is a shining example of what we as society can do to protect those that are most vulnerable. Thank you very much. Now, I also want to thank all of our speakers for your commitment to the protection of society's most vulnerable, yet also the ones with the most potential. Thank you for coming together today, albeit online, to present this amazing tool of the new guidelines designed to protect and help the younger generation on the internet. As a young person myself, and I think I've said this several times today, I can confirm that the fact that concrete actions and measures are sorely needed, and I believe these guidelines are a good step to meeting those measures and actions. Now, as His Excellency Mr. Musheru said, there are 283 participants from this call, from Geneva to Bangkok to Africa to the Americas. And as with the internet, we see here that the matter of protecting children online is also global. ICTs are changing the world like never before, and it is almost certain that the world that my children will grow up in 20, 30 years' time will be worlds apart from the one that even I saw growing up. Now, young people watch a lot of movies, and one of my favorite ones is Spider-Man, and I'd like to quote that here. With great power comes great responsibility. We as a society have the collective responsibility of not just protecting, but empowering children and young people who will go on to inherit the world that we have made today. In today's paradigm, a big part of that world will be teaching our children on how they can use the internet to their advantage. It's becoming increasingly clear to me, and I believe to many others, that those not yet connected are at risk of being left behind in this new digital economy. However, we must also work to protect children from the numerous dangers of the internet, many of which have been covered by our excellent speakers today. As a young person, I feel that the internet is like the great unknown, the Wild West of the old movies, full of treasures, not in the form of hidden chests, but rather knowledge, information, and skills that children and young people can use to improve their skill set, communication, connection, and quality of life. However, much like the great unknown, there are also numerous dangers that young people face, which I know leaves us vulnerable to the threats and the very significant threats that are out there on the internet. Please join us to embrace the work of the Child Online Protection Initiative to ensure that children are safe and protected and can express and contribute positively to the online digital platforms to become leaders of the world that we will have tomorrow. And thank you very much, and join us in support of the implementation of the guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. And Aditya, brilliant moderation. Thank you so much.